The FNAF community has pretty much everything figured out, but along the way there's some small pieces that we've tried to hide under a carpet and holes we've tried to cover with a carrot and epoxy, like in those weird videos you see underneath Family Guy clips. One of these main points is a creature most people had just put in the back of their head and completely forgotten about. In today's episode, I'm going to be gathering and cleaning up all of the information we have surrounding Mangle and hopefully provide a somewhat definitive answer as to what the deal with this tangled mess is. Mangle was first introduced in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and that's where we find the majority of information about him. When she was talked about from Phone Guy, he referred to her as a take-apart and put-back-together attraction, hence why she looks more like the inside of an electric toothbrush than an actual animatronic. We also learned that Mangle was supposed to be a more kid-friendly version of Foxy, which is very likely the main reason they're nearly identical. Throughout the game, Mangle simply goes around the vents, tries to piss you off as much as possible, and get a piece of your Mount Everest-sized forehead, which is, as you've probably heard a couple times before,
the bite of 87?
Something the internet has always been confused about, however, was whose spirit possesses Mangle. And to be honest, we never really get an answer. The main theory that people had was that Mangle was a dog. Now, just for some context, in Five Nights at Freddy's Pizzeria Simulator minigame Fruity Maze, you play as a girl named Susie, and you can see a reflection shining on the screen every time there's a major flash of light or you collect a power-up. As the game continues, slowly, the Golden Spring Bonnie suit appears behind you, which, if you don't know, is basically an unfucked up version of the Springtrap suit Afton really liked. As you get near the end of the game, her dead dog just starts appearing instead of some fruit. And once you complete it, the text, "He's not really dead. He's over here. Follow me," appears. Now, if you couldn't tell, this is somewhat clearly Afton luring Susie into the back room to be killed, where she is theorized to later become Chica. Once this was first found out, Game Theory made a video theorizing that Mangle was Susie's dog. He backed this up by saying that the dog was very likely William's first experience with Remnant, and that's why he was moving in the Save Them minigame. We'll hear a lot about that one later. He also mentioned that Mangle couldn't talk and rather just made a strange buzzing noise, and just as a final thing, he noted that Mangle was one of the only characters in the story to not be properly wrapped up. So surely all of these things add up, right? There's no one left for it to be, and no one's story is left unfinished, and unless, of course, he forgot someone. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie didn't teach us anything directly about the lore, and it was kind of like the books in the way that it was in a separate world. But just like the books, there's still some small things we can take from this. While I was watching the movie, the main thing that took me by surprise was Chica's cupcake, something I had never even thought about before seeing it on a big screen. The cupcake was moving on its own and making its own decisions, but they were always very blunt, and it seemed to chase and attack on sight, almost as if it were instinctual. Or maybe, just maybe, it was. And then when you start to think about it, things just seem to click. Why would they bother making Chica a fully animatronic cupcake? Why would this cupcake have eyes? Would Susie's pet dog not make more sense being directly next to the animatronic that Susie was in? Was it possible that Susie had been reunited with her pet, simply in a different form? At this point, I had almost convinced myself that Mangle wasn't a dog, but then that leads to another question. Who was Mangle? I scoured every single game for every single scene that Mangle was included in, and I found absolutely nothing. I scavenged for 3 days straight, trying to piece together any random piece of what this may be, and eventually, as a last-ditch resort, I called my friend. And the second I asked my friend this, they simply said, "What if Mangle just isn't possessed?" And I immediately thought that there is no way, that it just completely wouldn't work. But as I did more research, it started to make more sense, but it still had some errors. Why was Mangle coming after you? Surely the bite of 87 wasn't actually just a malfunction. But the more I thought about it, the more I started to like this idea. It would explain why, during the Save Them cutscene, Mangle is moving around freely on a path. A set path that he never strays from. And in the game, Mangle functions in a similar way to the rest of the presumably unpossessed toy animatronics. But to get a full grasp on the exact story, all we have to do is go back through the minigames. In the Save Him minigame at the very start of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, you see the death of the first child, and shortly after, in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, you play as Puppet and bring presents to dead children, which reveals the animatronic behind them. Once you reach the Save Them minigame, you find those same 5 bodies throughout the pizzeria. These were the original 5 deaths that led to the animatronics we know so well. And this is where I found what I've been looking for. Previously, I had mentioned the movement of Mangle and the other fun times being stood up in this scene, but this is where it got deeper. If Afton had used the spirit of Susie's dog to make Mangle, and we're presuming that she was lured near the time of FNAF 2, based off of the bodies in these cutscenes, how would Mangle have already been fully created and in service, and have gone from a normal animatronic to a take-apart rendition in such a short amount of time? Also, something very important is that someone is missing from almost all these cutscenes. There's Foxy leaned against a wall, Bonnie and Chica in that same room, and you play as Freddy. So who's missing, you may ask? The cupcake. In this cutscene, Chica is simply slumped over, just like a child, and not a cupcake in sight. The next time, in fact, we see the cupcake is 1993 in FNAF 1, where Chica is fully functional with her mechanical cupcake. That's also something important to mention. Toy Chica's cupcake is very basic, pretty much just being a cupcake with fancy googly eyes on it. Chica's cupcake is a fully functioning, moving animatronic with lit up, active eyes. Now, I know that this theory isn't without its plot holes, but I want to try and clarify some things real quickly. First, I want to mention all of the people who are going to talk about Ultimate Custom Night. The game definitely gave us some closure, but I think a lot of the animatronics were simply figments of William's mind, as the game was supposed to work as a sort of hell for him. Hence, why the nightmare animatronics are there. And I think the info we learn from this game should be taken with a very large grain of salt. There's a scene in one of the cutscenes where Foxy refers to Mangle as a dog, and a lot of people use this as evidence, but I would also like to remind you that the legitimate translation of slightly earlier in the script is a minute-long monologue of Freddy talking about cornflakes. So, take that how you want it. And lastly, I would like to address this video. No, unfortunately, Mangle's audio is not saying anything somewhat lore related. The original audio file can actually be found on a website Scott used for almost all of his sound effects called Sound Dogs. If you're interested in the audio effect, it's called Drone. And if you don't believe me, here's a little segment of it. Also, one last thing. This is just a theory. I am not stating this as a fact. This is what I have gathered from my past 3 weeks of thinking about nothing but an animatronic fox. If you have anything that disproves this, or you feel like taking it apart and putting it back together, be sure and drop it down in the comments, and I'd be happy to talk about any sort of ideas you have. And I'll see you all in the next video.